So thank you so much for joining us, all of you. My name is George Ndirango. I'll be your moderator today. We have with us here Antonio Pedro in Kigali. We have Max Jarrett in Geneva. We have Dr. Joe Wadawi from Nairobi and Iris Monroe from Barbados. So thank you very much for joining us. We want to disseminate and demystify this so-called blue economy. So many people don't understand it. So this is just one of the sessions to a series of subsequent sessions to understand what this blue economy really means. So I think we'll just get the ball rolling from Kigali, since we're the ones who are hosting you guys. And we'll start with Pedro, maybe to give us a brief situation or maybe the current situation of where the blue economy is. And then we'll just take it from there with questions back and forth with all of you who are joining us from different locations.
Yeah, thank you, George. And thank you, Max, Joe, and Iris for accepting our invitation to have this conversation. This is going to be the first of a series of discussions that we'll be having with different experts on this very important subject matter. And it's going to be the theme of our meeting in Madagascar on the 2nd to 5th March this year. We organize every year what we call Intergovernmental Committee of Experts, which is our statutory meeting where we meet with our stakeholders, member states, regional economic communities, and other organizations to discuss issues of interest to our respective sub-region. So in Madagascar, we will be discussing the blue economy. And of course, it's a subject that is important for Madagascar being an island state, but it's equally important for all the coastal states that we cover. We cover 14 member states, from DRC to the west to the Seychelles in the east, and from Ethiopia in the north and Tanzania in the south. So even though, I mean, intuitively you'd think that a subject like a blue economy would be only important for island states or coastal states, I would like to submit that in global economies that are interlinked today, what happens in island states or in island states matter, in coastal states or in island states matters also for landlocked states. So we are going to go to Madagascar with a holistic concept of the blue economy. Because why is it important for us to discuss the blue economy? First of all, I mean, as everybody knows, life started in the oceans, and they continue to support the life as we know it today. In addition, 72% of our planet is covered by oceans, and 95% of its biosphere is also in the oceans. If you are, of course, interested in hydrocarbons, I think it will also be important to know that seabeds provide 32% of the global supply of hydrocarbons. So it's a very important resource. In addition to that, especially for landlocked countries, coastal and island states represent their gateways to the world. So we'll be discussing also aspects on maritime transport systems and how vital they are for landlocked countries. So it's an integrated approach to the discussion on the blue economy. And specifically for, and I'm sure we're going to go deep into this later, for island states and coastal states, this is a very important resource that drives some of the economies. For example, the Seychelles is a state that depends on tourism, depends on its fisheries. Which are some of the key drivers of any discussion on blue economy. So we're talking about fisheries, we are talking about shipment and transport, we are talking about tourism, and of course earlier when I made reference to hydrocarbons, energy is important. And particularly for small island states, climate change issues are critical. I think there was a conversation in Samoa a couple of months ago about this, which informed what are the issues that are critical for small island states. And we have two of them in our region, the Seychelles and Comoros. So I think as an introduction, I wanted to share with you why we are taking this subject matter to Madagascar, and why is it important for our policymakers to have an holistic understanding of blue economy. It's not one new fashion. It's really a very critical aspect that requires very good understanding. Our member states have to first understand what is the potential that these resources offer, what are the opportunities that they can harness, and what is it that they need in terms of infrastructure. And I'm talking about hard and soft infrastructure, policies and otherwise, to be able to harness these resources. So this is the objective of our meeting in Madagascar. And thank you again, George, for facilitating our discussions today.
All right, thank you very much, Pedro, for that. At least we are lucky enough today. We have a very diverse set of geographical locations. We have Kigali, Geneva, Nairobi, and Barbados. So we can talk about this issue both from a landlocked and an interlocked point of perspective in terms of this discussion. So let's just throw this to Iris now. We want to start with the our first question, and then we'll move to Max and Joe. But do you think, Iris, do you think that Africa is ready to embrace this blue economy and the opportunities that come with it? Do you think that any discussions that are made here in Africa in terms of blue economy would have a ripple effect to the rest of the world?
Yes, I do. I think actually Africa's seems to have been making a lot of progress on development of the concept, even perhaps more than the other two regions, which you might initially not expect, but such as the promotion of the report by the UNECA in Samoa, where they presented the opportunities for African SIDS on the blue economy. They've been quite at the forefront of developing this concept and bringing it to the other nation. I think this is the first time that now a region is trying to incorporate the blue economy to landlocked states. And I think that's actually very novel, and it's also very challenging. And I'm sure that, as Mr. Pedro was saying, we need to make sure that we understand what are the sort of the spill-offs effects of, if you improve the blue economy, what does it mean for landlocked states? But I think actually that's very novel that Africa is pushing, and now Eastern Africa is pushing this in this regard, because it hasn't really been done before. What can it mean for countries behind those coastal? It started with SIDS, and now it's including coastal countries, and now what does it also mean for landlocked states? So obviously, different countries have different prospects, and they have different opportunities and challenges within developing different sectors of the blue economy. So one country might have more opportunity in one sector, in maritime trade, or whereas, for example, as we said before, the Seychelles has a lot of, 52% of their exports are based on fisheries. So that is very different from talking about Tanzania, for example. So yes, it does have potential. I think there's a lot of potential in there. But you also need to look at individual countries and what are their opportunities and where are the bottlenecks as well.
All right, thank you. We'll probably just switch to Joe, because he's the direct link to Kigali. And we understand that for Kigali to survive in a blue economy, Nairobi has to be, in one way or another, really interlinked with us. So maybe we'll go to Joe and we can ask you, Joe, do you think small island developing states are in a position to embrace such an economy to a larger scale, given what you've been able to accomplish so far in terms of maritime resources and the policies laid down for the blue economy?
Thank you very much, George. I believe that there is a great interdependence between the coastal states and the landlocked countries. And a very good example, like you just insinuated, is the relationship between Kenya and Rwanda. A good amount of Rwanda's economy depends so much on what Kenya can do in terms of the shipment of whatever they have, whatever they need for their economy. Indeed, I would want to say that the greatest, I think the largest amount of goods moving around the world move through the seas. And for that matter, I don't think we have got any choice but to embrace the blue economy. And where there is a weakness, we just have to we just have to rise up and correct things and straighten them. I want to give you an example. One of the aspects that I believe, has affected Rwanda, and in many cases, if it doesn't work well in Mombasa for their shipment of their goods, then they would want to move to another country that can do that best for them. And we are now counting the number of days that it should take for certain items that are supposed to be moving through the port of Mombasa to Rwanda. And if we can give them, pass over these goods at the shortest time possible, then we know that the blue economy that Rwanda would be yearning for is working well for them. And that is why I believe that we must make a very good environment for championing blue economy because of that level of interdependence. But I believe there are challenges. I don't know whether we'll come to those challenges later, because quite often these are some of the aspects that I believe we want to table so that we can appropriate the elements of blue economy fully.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joe, for that. You gave us at least a step in, one leg in when we're talking about the challenges. We'd like to throw it to Max. Now, from a broader perspective, as we start to tackle the financial opportunities and policy regulations and the challenges, as you mentioned. Now, Max, you understand, I'm sure you understand this topic on a more professional level, where your economy or your country and the countries around it have been able to take this blue economy and even be able to develop it to a level that is more updated, or a level that is still a challenge to some of these countries here in Africa that we're experiencing around us. Now, what would you say are some of the opportunities or the financial opportunities that we are likely to look forward to from your point of view?
I'm sorry, George, I'm not in a position to actually answer that question directly first. There are a few things we need to clarify here. First, my name is Max Bankole Jarrett. I'm the Deputy Director of the Africa Progress Panel Secretariat. The Africa Progress panel is chaired by Mr. Kofi Annan, and we are based in Geneva, but we focus on Africa. I am Liberian by birth, so when you say my country is not Switzerland. It is a coastal country. But let me just also, we need to clarify what we mean by blue economy. I think it's very narrow to refer to the blue economy only as the marine resources and the oceans and the coasts. We had a report out this year, 2014 Africa Progress Report, is entitled Grain, Fish, Money, Financing Africa's Green and Blue Revolutions. In there, when we refer to blue, we're talking about the economies that can come from water. Of course, the majority is the coastal, is the oceans, but let us forget aquaculture. So what is in the rivers? East Africa, you've got Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika. The amount of the economies around those are huge. So for us now, for me to sit here, and we're just talking about Rwanda and Tanzania, or Rwanda and Kenya and Uganda as if it's just the sea. It's not just the sea. There was a huge economy around Lake Victoria. At Entebbe, you know, all the tilapia and stuff. Foreigners are coming in and taking those resources. There are issues there in terms of the processing of that fish. So for East Africa, for you, your region, you need to be aware that the blue economy is not just Seychelles, not just Mauritius, not just Madagascar. It is inland resources. Even landlocked states have a blue economy, which they should be trying more to harness. Now, to come to your question regarding the financing, please repeat it, because I was focused on saying this, and I didn't quite understand what you meant in terms of me, my country. We say my country being Switzerland, because give me the question again, please.
Your country, by your country, I meant where you're based right now. You've been able to understand the economies that are happening around you. But the question was, what financing opportunities are being looked at in order to improve at least the human well-being and just being worked around this blue economy? What financing opportunities are we looking at in different regions?
I've really not I'm really not in a position as an African based here in Switzerland to speak about what the Swiss are doing regarding the economy of their Lake Geneva and so forth. I can't speak to that. I really can't. Didn't come prepared to speak to that. I can speak about Africa. I can speak about our issues African-wide. I can speak about what we need to do in terms of stopping the plunder of our African oceans. I can speak about issues such as, how do you actually monetize some of that fish that is being lost to us through illegal, unregulated, and so forth fishing. By nature of the fact, for example, we've got the port states measures agreement.
Why don't you start talking about those issues specifically? Why don't
exactly.
you?
Let's first go into the amount of resources that are being lost from the blue economy. It's huge. I mean, we know that West Africa alone, you're not covering West Africa, but West Africa alone, we quote and cite in our report, it loses 1.3 billion United States dollars per year to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. We're trying to get figures for your region. Maybe you can help us with that. We couldn't get it for this year, but I think it's even bigger. I know the Seychelles, the Minister Peter Simon was saying things about that in the meeting we went to, that it's huge, but we're still not sure how much is lost in the Indian Ocean. I'm sure it could be much more than West Africa. Now, there are some policies, tools that are being put in place now to try and stop some of that. One of them is the Port States Measures Agreement, which is something that came out of the FAO. And we need a number of countries to sign up to that. We need, I think, 25 countries have to sign up to that for it to come in force, okay? At the moment, only 11 countries, that's 10 countries and the European Union, have signed up to that. Of that, only 3 African countries, Seychelles, Gabon, and Mozambique. It will only take effect if 25 states sign up. So when you go to Madagascar, those countries in your region who need to sign up to that, let's have those ministers or whoever agree to sign up to that, because until we get that in force, we don't have the tool that we need to enforce some of that Africa-wide. So those are the kind of things we should be thinking about in terms of A, stopping the plunder of our oceans, and B, moving to a level where we are monitoring, and enhancing our capabilities to stop whatever plunder is going on of the blue economy. Because if we can't retain the value of those oceans for ourselves, others will keep taking them away. So that's just some of the few things I wanted to put on the table. One is that look at the inland as well, aquaculture, and 2, the oceans in terms of what's being lost from fish. There are things we can do, we should be doing as Africans, as states, to at least join a global effort to stop this plunder, which we're not yet doing. And it's an issue of ratifying. It's just literally an issue of ratifying. Gabon has done it. In your region, Seychelles has done it, and Mozambique. Is Mozambique also in your region? Eastern Africa, Pedro?
Not really. Yes.
But there are some states in your region who could be signing up to that, who need to, and you need to make that a priority at the ICE.
Yes. I mean, if I can step in now. First, Max, thank you very much for bringing this aspect that we are not only talking about oceans, that we are also talking about resources that are available in our rivers, in our lakes, and so on and so forth. I think that's a very important issue to clarify. And it's in line with the idea that we really need an integrated approach to understanding of the blue economy. The second issue that I also subscribe to you completely is the idea that African member states have to go back to basics, and back to basics means they need the necessary policy and legal and regulatory frameworks to be able to pursue some of their development objectives. For example, the issue of illegal exploitation of resources. If you do not have a supporting legal and regulatory regime with which you can then take people to court and so on and so forth, it will not be possible to address this issue. And again, one thing that is important is that Africa alone cannot really address this on itself, so that it requires international cooperation. And I would like to bring, with your permission, one particular aspect where international cooperation is really, really very critical, is the exploitation of seabed resources. Because, as you know, there is quite a lot of, and I've mentioned earlier that, 75% or numbers like that of our Earth is occupied by oceans. So, and seabed resources and are now becoming economic to exploit. And I'm talking specifically to mineral resources. And some of those resources are in international waters. They are, therefore, international or global public goods. However, the exploitation of those resources is dictated by your ability to access technology, which means that it's essentially the developed world, the advanced countries that have access to those resources because of their technological advance and so on. So, but moving forward, we would need an international governance architecture that recognizes that because these are international public goods, every country in the world should have the same right to access the resources and to profit and benefit from those resources. So I see at the level of the international debate that this issue to become increasingly important, and institutions like, the Africa Progress Panel, I think could really pick up on these emerging issues and how the international governance architecture need to take those into consideration. Another aspect which of course requires international cooperation has to do with the strategic or geopolitical issues around some of those resources. Let's talk about, for example, the Mozambican Channel. The Mozambican Channel, as you know, is a strategic channel for transport of goods, including oil and gas resources from the Middle East and so on. And unfortunately, most of our member states are not adequately equipped to do the necessary patrolling of this very strategic transport route, and they depend on the support of other countries in the West and otherwise. And this became evident during the days of the piracy in the Somali coast. So it is therefore important for African countries to be aware of the need to equip themselves with the necessary capacity to address also the security risks associated with some of those routes. So those are some of the issues that I wanted to flag in a discussion about the role of the international community, the roles and responsibilities of our member states as well, in terms of building their own capacity and understanding that it's their responsibility also to take care of their resources. Otherwise, the plunder that Max mentioned earlier will continue.
Right, Max, you want to add on to that as well?
Yes, I want to. Excellent what Pedro has said. In many other areas, we have things where we are in the forefront and the international community is not really with us, and so then we have to make a case, like for the cancellation of debt and so forth, what happened, say, 15 years ago, to get people onto our side and move forward. In this particular case, there's already an emerging global agenda on this. But the thing is, we are, as Africans, to a certain degree, missing in action, and it's a no-brainer, really. The FAO is leading on this, and we have the United States. There was a meeting they had on our oceans in June where Secretary of State Kerry spoke, Leonardo DiCaprio was there as well. Peter Sinon, the Minister of Seychelles, was there, where there is a global vanguard now. Our African states, especially the coastal states and those which have a blue economy, need to join up to this coalition of the willing and sign up to these things and to make them happen. The thing is, we're asleep at the wheel so far, I think. So this is not a case for us having to shout in the dark. Already the agenda is there, the train is moving, we've got to be in the engine room. We have to, and I think it's no excuse. As Africans, we have no excuse this time to join those who already are waiting to move forward to make a change in what Pedro is saying. That's what I wanted to put on the table.
All right, I like how you mentioned that Africa was missing in action because there was an issue about the European Union giving financial support in return for fishing rights in Africa, but we'll come to that. Maybe you can switch to Iris. Could you please give us some of your experiences, or we can learn from maybe from your part of the globe?
Well, I think, well, first of all, just to stay in your region for a second, I think to what Max was saying, it's very important that not only do we acknowledge that there's this large-scale IUU fishing which is taking place, but also within the region that the sort of offshore pelagic fisheries, so for the tuna stocks, that even those that are caught legally, a lot of the benefits do not flow back to the African countries. So like, for example, the Seychelles, the fishing fleet of Seychelles might have the Seychelles flags, but a large part of the processing and so on doesn't take place there. So I think also a lot of opportunities are to improve the benefits within that fishery which is taking place. And if you look at Mauritius, for example, they've invested a lot in improving their processing facilities. So they're now ready to they're processing like very high-end upscale sashimi tuna, which obviously requires a lot of investment. But I think these, you reap a lot more of the benefits if some of these countries would improve their fishing handling facilities and safety standards and so on. So I think, within the legal boundaries as well of fishing, though there are opportunities there. The Caribbean now is a very different area because it doesn't have these sort of large foreign-owned industrial fleets. And because the EEZs of the countries, there's a large-scale IUU fishing, and we face the same issues here, like ocean acidification, for example, pollution. There's a lot of areas which have a lot of overlaps. At the same time, some of these, like piracy and so on, there's definitely not quite the same for the Caribbean, so you can't like copy some of the lessons learned. But I think there are definitely similarities, and I think the region should focus on improving the access agreements with the EU on the fishing. And also in the Caribbean, there's been a lot of movement with, which is a different sector, but more in the tourism and the renewable energy. They've been trying to mainstream sort of renewable energy developments in alliance with the tourism sector. So if you're looking at developing tourism for the Eastern African region, then you should align this with development of renewable energy, because obviously otherwise you're facing other environmental challenges. But also another point I'd like to make, I think the blue economy is mildly contradictory in some aspects, because it likes to promote social equity and environmental sustainability and so on, and social inclusive, which is obviously what I promote as well. At the same time, some of these developments, like you were saying, like harbor developments, very large scale maritime infrastructure developments, require a lot of technical and financial capacity that makes social inclusion difficult. So we need to make sure, if you look at Kenya, for example, that is doing small scale aquaculture ponds in rural areas, which are very small, and that the money is used to employ secondary school children to help in these farms and educate them, so that we do not make some of these projects very large, but try and really make them socially inclusive. And I think there are definitely opportunities there, and that some lessons can be learned from the region itself and also from the other regions.
Well, I think social inclusion and financial inclusion of some of the natives, it's a topic that could bring a lot of, we agree to disagree. Marx said that we should not only look at the seas and at blue economy as only the seas, but allow us to just stick to that, Max, for just a few more minutes. Now, there's been an issue in areas like Comoros. We'll talk about Comoros because some areas in Africa, there's not such proper statistics, but there was an issue where fish in their water does not create employment for the natives. This is because the fish are unloaded onshore with European ships taking the fish to Europe or other countries with better handling facilities and better transport and better, just better infrastructure. Now, there are countries like Seychelles and Madagascar and Kenya, of course, but what is being done to uplift the countries with affordable labor and abundant resources to tackle these issues and maybe move forward to going forward now from there? I'm asking Iris, and we could also flow over to...
I thought you were asking someone else. Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Do that again.
Joe, maybe you could just take up from there, and then maybe Iris will continue.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I also wanted to agree with Max that the blue economy is much bigger than what we, and of course, Pedro has confirmed that. But one thing that I would like to mention is that signing some of these protocols is one thing, but we also need the institutional capacity to punish any form of misgiving. And I think that is one of the areas in which we would fail. I think we have got typical examples here in Kenya, where we have got our water towers, which partly support the water masses that are inland, like we have noted. That is part of the blue economy. And so if they are not doing very well, definitely we would be worried that the blue economy is not going to thrive inland, rather than looking at it from the outside. And as such, it will be very important for us to move towards the forest and see how the blue economy can be supported from that domain. If I can just mention something, that the legal framework to punish abuse of such aspects is important for Africa, because you know very well that in our region, there are several instances in which certain legal frameworks will be put in place, protocols are signed, and then we start to abuse them. I think that must be addressed for this blue economy, and actually that is part of the social equity that should be drummed up in the blue economy, because the vulnerables will be the people who do not have money and to support themselves, but those who have got a lot of money will be able to get away with some of these abuses. I think that is extremely important for us.
All right, thank you, Pedro.
Yeah, well, I think, I don't know whether I said it at the beginning, that our conversation in Madagascar is about oceans as development spaces, or the blue economy as opportunities to really promote integrated development, which does not leave anybody behind. And I believe that there are opportunities, for example, for greater collaboration between large-scale and small-scale operators. And of course, that can be difficult. But I think with necessary local content provisions in the negotiations that we enter with some of the countries, the destination countries for some of our products. For example, we are talking of fisheries. I think it is possible to have a win-win partnerships where those countries would have access to our resources, but at the same time, they contribute to building the necessary capacity of the artisanal fishermen and so on and so forth. I think that concept is very, very important. The second thing that I also wanted to throw is that in discussing the blue economy, of course, we cannot separate blue economy from green economy. It's essentially part of the same conversation, which brings me, therefore, to the need for policymakers and all the stakeholders to look at opportunities arising out of the ongoing discussions on climate change. So essentially the question is, to which extent can we harness resources arising out of climate financing, the Green Fund, and so on and so forth, to support some of the initiatives that we'll be talking of. I mean, how, for example, the developmental aspects that we were raising before. I think, again, there are opportunities there, and we hope to be able to create the necessary platforms in Madagascar for us to go deep into this, so that we go through and analyze the opportunities. The other thing, and to a certain extent I've already addressed it, is the need to have a value chain approach when we discuss this. From any of the drivers that I had mentioned earlier on the blue economy. Value chain analysis would provide us a better understanding of the opportunities of, if we want to go into value addition and so on, who are our competitors, who has a better, competitive profile in terms of cost, resources, and so on and so forth, so that when we then design our strategies, those are strategies that are informed by real data, by good understanding of the fundamentals for you to be able to harness all the potential that these resources can provide. So that's where your point, Joe, about the need to have strong institutions is very, very important. I mean, policy cohesion, all of those things that we say need to be taken one step further by having targeted interventions throughout those areas that we would have identified in the value chains as being those that we have comparative advantage. So this is applicable to tourism, to fisheries, to any of the areas that we've mentioned earlier as being the key drivers for any conversation on the blue economy.
All right, now, Pedro, you've mentioned about the green agriculture, which is a broader scale and at least a parallel possibly to the blue economy. But let's go to what is actually contrasting inside the blue economy itself. We have different conflicts that have arisen in between inside the blue economy. We'll just pass this to Max and to you, Pedro, as well. Now, there is an issue whereby there are certain conflicts inside the blue economy. Number one, we have an issue like tourism, which creates a higher demand on energy. Which is already consuming a lot of foreign exchange earned by the small island states. Then we have an issue like deep sea mining, which is harming aqua environment. We have an issue about aquaculture, increasing a pressure on natural resources, issues like that. So how do we create a balance between these sectors inside the blue economy?
Well, do you want me to start?
Well, you and
okay, I think a very important concept that is applicable to any discussion on sustainable development is the need to have what we call the strategic environmental assessments. This is really a macro level discussion about what is it at the end of the day the best land use option.
All right, and as we continue, have you done any like feasibility studies for maybe moving on forward? Do we have any statistics?
Well, as Economic Commission for Africa, our key mandate is first to provide our member states and our stakeholders with the necessary policy analysis, then support those policy analysis with adequate knowledge delivery, capacity development, and so on. So within the context of our mandate, we have already helped countries better understand the concepts of strategic environmental assessment. For example, here in Rwanda, we've worked with REMA, with the Rwanda Environmental Management Agency, to mainstream the concepts of strategic environmental assessments into the way business is done here. And I'm very happy to say that, REMA has done a very, very good job, and this is now becoming part and parcel of the policy-making process here. But going back to what I was mentioned earlier, so it is important to have those kinds of discussions, to look at what are the trade-offs. Sometimes, of course, it's not easy to make the right kind of choice because you have all sorts of pressures arising out of sometimes the understanding that, for example, mineral resources could provide you a better cash flow than agriculture or otherwise. The fact that we don't have the necessary understanding yet of how to take account of what we call the natural capital. And all of those are issues that are required. You have to have the necessary evidence, the necessary data to inform those policy discussions. Because, invariable in most countries, policymakers would say, well, let's go for mining because this is the best way of utilizing it. But if we've had necessary knowledge about other aspects of sustainable development, perhaps the decisions could have been different. So again, I would like to go back to Joe's comments about the importance of having the institutions that are capable, that understand the entire how do you call it, value chain. They have the necessary understanding of the implications of one or other policy option. It's not an easy proposition, let me put it that way. Of course, that's why we are going to Madagascar to go back to basics and bring all of these issues to raise awareness about them, and then offer the member states with some of the options that could be, of course, considered. Again, there is no size that fits all. Right. All of these discussions, we always have to contextualize, and because it's, I mean, I'm throwing here the idea that we need strategic environmental assessments. Of course, it's interesting. It's perhaps what every country needs to do, but we need to have the tools that are tailored to your capacity to enforce them. So you don't go and legislate about things that you are not able to enforce. So I think that's one of the messages that is important. But perhaps I'm sure Max, Joe, and Iris would offer their own perspectives about this.
All right, Max, could you please give us your feedback on what we were talking about, creating a balance between some of these issues that are being raised in terms of conflicts between in the blue economy sectors?
I'm totally with Pedro. Then I always like to bring things back to basics and maybe speak in blunt language. I think if ever I'm a politician, this is how I would talk. You talk about mining and balance either or. It's never really either or, but you have children, okay? You can either send your daughter to school, or you could put her to work on the farm, or you could say that, oh, people make quite a good bit of money selling their bodies, and there's a lot of money today. You sell your daughter on the street and you get $100. Or you can send your daughter to school, she can become a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever, and help the family. The stuff in the ground is, in a way, we're prostituting our resources sometimes. I really feel that. We don't even know the value of our resources over the long term. We just mine it up and give it to someone else to turn it into some value and then sell us the product back. It's the same thing in the oceans. It really is the same thing in the oceans. We've got to have a holistic, as Pedro says, and also a long-term view, but also a view in which we're trying to not only have long-term in terms of how we use it, but the whole issue, I want to bring in the issue of intergenerational equity, So it's not just that we're transforming and selling these resources today for what we can get and buy with them, but also, can it be enough? Can it be sustainable so that our children's children can also in some way benefit from the blue economy? As Pedro said at the beginning, we came out of the oceans as human beings. Let's make sure the oceans are still there and still able to generate resources both for us to eat and also resources that we can turn into some kind of value that can help us transform Africa, which is what we're trying to do. So I'm totally with Pedro on this.
All right, Joe, what do you think remains to be done? Because we're talking about policy regulation, we're talking about infrastructure development. What do you think remains to be done so that we can at least recognize that this blue economy really has an impact on what we're on our regional or African continental output?
I think if you have touched on the issues of equity, then I think that would also be a very important aspect. I think Pedro has also talked about the value system, the value chain. And this is a question of benefiting from the resource, from the large producers through to the middlemen, up to the small man who probably did not actually have a hand in these resources. That will provide us with that, the intra-generational equity. Because I know Marx has mentioned that we need the intergenerational equity, which is extremely important for the future. But at the moment, the people who are actually present as these resources are being exploited must actually be party to the benefits that are accruing from these resources. So we need some intra-generational equity. But allow me to also talk about access to capital for the development of some of these resources that come with the blue economy. Some will get access, while others may not be able to get access to this capital. And I want us to also appreciate that to harness the resources of the blue economy requires huge funds that probably may not be available in our region, probably required from the international sources. And it would be extremely important to have typical stakeholders who probably can work together with the government so that the government can provide guarantees for international funding so that the private ventures can thrive to support the blue economies and harness its resources. Otherwise, you will realize that quite a number of aspects that are to do with the blue economy, for example, the ports, the large ports, the big cruise ships, will largely be in the hands of the state. And the state probably may not actually support the framework as we may want it to come down to the levels where every other person may want to benefit. I think that probably necessary to look.
Thank you very much, Joe. Now, probably as we come to our last round of questions, I just want to ask to throw it across the board. Now, there is that small-scale fisherman or a fishery organization that is maybe deep down inside the village, near the lake, or just somewhere where they don't really understand that they are part of a bigger picture of the blue economy, and they will never really understand that what they contribute can really be, replicated to on a larger scale. So whatever they get in terms of 3 fish, that is all they get. They have proper fishing skills. They have they have so much resources around them. So how is tracking done? How is sensitization done? How do we ensure that these people at the grassroots level at least understand that they are part of a much broader picture? We could start Max and Iris as well.
Okay, I want to come back to just say that I don't think you're being fair there. I always give agency to our Africans and our people at the bottom. They are economic agents and also communal agents, and they know, okay, he wants to fish for his family first, but every fisherman is trying to grow up to get to some kind of scale, okay? And they know that, they know that there is a market maybe in this village, and if that guy is able to get his fish out and it's sold, he will want to go back, or she will go back to get more fish and grow to scale. So I don't necessarily think it's fair to say they don't know that they're connected to something, because they are. The issue is, how do you enable people and enhance them to take things to the level they want to go to? Really, this is like saying 20 years ago when they said about telephones, the mobile phones. Oh yeah, the Africans, oh, they don't have landlines. Oh, who should the phones be for? The phones are only for the big people. Look what happens. This fisherman you're talking about right now, a woman, on Lake Victoria in Entebbe, from a small village, has 1 phone at least. Now, how does he or she have an app now to know the cost of tilapia, what it is in Entebbe and what it is at one of the restaurants in Nairobi, so that no one can cheat him or her? So let's give them the agency, that's all I'm saying, okay? And create the ecosystem around them that enhances our Africans. Yeah, you say grassroots, but I'm saying our people, basically, to be able to stand as agents, economic agents, have the respect. We need to get people the respect that is due them as Africans and as people, even at the bottom of the pyramid, yeah, to grow to the level they need to transform Africa. And my favorite word is not development, it is transformation. And if we go into it with that approach, we can change this continent. So I'll just stop there.
Cheers, Max. Thank you for that. Iris, over to you.
Yes, no, I fully agree with Max there. I think fishers are very well connected to the global market. If you look at the Nile perch fishery in Lake Victoria, but also on the coast and so on, fishers are definitely well embedded in global value chains, and you can see that the global financial crisis impacted market for fish and so on. So this all connects fishers to the global market. I would also like to come back what Antonio said before about accessing sort of the green climate funds, for example, because I also think we need to still stress the importance of environmentally sound developments within the blue economy for fisheries, but also for other sectors and that perhaps the pursuit of the blue carbon market also provides great opportunities to improve biodiversity and so on. The blue carbon credit trade relates to sort of the capture of carbon that's buried in mangrove, seagrasses, and marshes and so on. And that for countries who do not have a large forest to apply for the REDD funds, for example, the reducing emissions from deforestation, forest degradation, they could apply for the blue carbon trade and this could provide large opportunities to restore some of biodiversity, nursery grounds of fisheries and so on, and it could become like a win-win situation where you improve sustainability of fisheries and just improve the livelihood of fishers while getting also looking at biodiversity and sustainability, and also getting international funds. So I think it'd be good to look at those type of opportunities that the blue economy concept offers.
Do you have anything to add on?
Yes, well, first, I fully agree with Max Jared that there's a lot of ingenuity, dynamism in the informal sector. And one of the scenarios, those that like to build scenarios about Africa, conceives that Africa with the informal sector, but an informal sector that is enabled, that is empowered, that is part and parcel of the solutions. So I think, therefore, the concept that the fisherman out there in the village does not know what's going on in the world, I think is a wrong sort of assumption. And in particular in our sub-region, I mean, everybody talks about M-Pesas and all of those things that brought better financial inclusion. I think all of those developments have enabled the financialization of the informal. And I think the same applies to, or could be applicable to enabling the fishermen in the village to be linked to the global value chains. And Iris have said it very, very, put it quite well. I mean, the situation with the fishermen in Lake Victoria and the Nile perch that knows, the going price elsewhere. So I think it's important, therefore, when we develop such concepts, to think on the basis that everybody is part of the solution, and everybody can contribute to the outcomes if they are provided with the necessary options, that they are better informed about what is available. And so one of our objectives, of course, is to raise awareness about this. I mean, through platforms as this conversation today, we hope to be able to ensure that this does not stay at the posh hotels in Antananarivo or in any other capital, but indeed penetrates in other layers. And we have, and then the second thing that I wanted to say is that, there's a lot of very interesting things already happening on the continent and in this part of Africa. So it's not only about challenges, not only about problems. We have very, very interesting and good examples of how this thing is done. We know that, for example, the level of processing, for example, of tuna in the seashells is quite advanced, and Mauritius for that matter as well. So there are opportunities for us to learn from countries that are aware at the same level of development, and then again contextualize to our own situation and package the policy options accordingly. So this is very important, and our discussions in Madagascar are also about that, providing an opportunity for our member states to peer learn from each other. But of course, it's important to say that this is not an easy conversation, and that we really need to make serious investments in first understanding what we're talking about, understanding what are the opportunities, understanding what is that we need to do in order to be able to take to exploit all of this potential in its fullness. I think my good friend Mike Morris, Rafik Kaplinsky, and David Kaplan they've written a very interesting book, which is One Thing Leads to Another, which is essentially a notion that you have to go step by step. So that when you have a vision, you have to support that vision with the necessary policy and legal and regulatory framework. And then once you have the legal and regulatory framework, you have to have the institutions that then will enforce the implementation of those things. And that you have to have your milestones, your targets, and so on and so forth. So we are advocating for a step-by-step approach, by serious work, staying the course and being persistent. And of course, bringing everybody along and building a vision that can outlast the currency of political cycles and electoral cycles. So, I mean, this is, of course, a conversation for politicians, for laymen, for everybody. And I'm sure through processes like the one we started today, we will be able to build that coalition that was mentioned earlier, to be able, coalition of the willing, for us to be able to harness these very important resources for the continent. And I mean, from my end, thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you, Max, Joe, and Irish for being part of this conversation. And see you in Madagascar.